What wedding moment screamed they won't last? They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but I've got 500 weddings worth of footage that says the truth is hidden in the single frame where everyone forgets the camera is there. You want to know what's crazier than a bride calling off the wedding at the altar? A father wishing his son good luck, as if the marriage was a terminal illness. I saw it happen. I kept rolling. And what happened after the cake was cut? I'm pretty sure I filmed the first hour of a homicide investigation. I'm a retired wedding videographer. I've been to over 500 weddings. You learn to read a room in a single, silent pan of the camera. The cliche is the drunken uncle's speech or the bride crying at the altar. The real cracks are quieter. They happen in the moments no one is looking. This one, though, this one had a crack you could hear from the back of the church. It was a massive, high-budget affair. Think less rustic barn and more corporate merger with a floral budget of a small car. The groom, let's call him Mark, was a surgeon. Calm, steady, the kind of guy who probably practiced his vows like a surgical procedure. Precise, bloodless, efficient. The bride, Sarah, was a force of nature, a high-end event planner. The wedding was her magnum opus. Every napkin fold, every lighting cue was a testament to her control. And that was the thing. You could feel it. The wedding wasn't a celebration of them. It was her project. He was a participant, not a partner. He followed instructions. She directed traffic. It felt less like a marriage and more like the final, most complex event she'd ever booked. The moment came during the toasts. Not the best man, who gave a perfectly adequate speech about college escapades. Not the maid of honor, who made a tearful, generic speech about finding your person. It was the father of the groom. He was a quiet man, a retired engineer. He looked uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, like a man wearing another man's skin. He stood up, tapped the microphone, and the feedback squealed. He flinched. He began with the usual. How proud he was. How Mark had always been focused, determined. Then he paused. He looked at his son, then at Sarah, who was smiling a smile that was starting to look a little fixed. Mark, he said, his voice a low rumble. You've always been a problem solver. You see a complex system, you figure out how to make it run perfectly. I've watched you do it with everything. He took a sip of water, a long sip. Then he turned to Sarah. Sarah, I have watched my son become a master at managing complex, unpredictable systems. And I have to say, in the short time I've known you, he chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. You might be the most intricate system he's ever taken on. He lifted his glass. So here's to you, Mark. May your troubleshooting skills be up to the task. The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable silence of a poignant moment. It was the silence of a room full of people doing complex mental gymnastics to interpret what they just heard. The bride's smile didn't waver. It calcified. Her eyes, however, did a quick, sharp sweep across the head table, landing on her new husband with a look that wasn't anger. It was inventory, like she was mentally cataloging a vendor who had just delivered the wrong centerpieces. Mark didn't look at his father. He didn't look at his bride. He stared at the condensation forming on his water glass, his jaw working silently, like he was trying to swallow a stone. I kept my camera rolling, the red light a tiny, unblinking eye. The father of the groom sat back down. No one clapped for a beat. Then a smattering of confused, polite applause broke out. The rest of the reception was a masterpiece of performance. They did the first dance. They cut the cake with their hands perfectly aligned over the knife. They smiled for the family portraits, but the space between them had changed. It was no longer the space of a director and her actor. It was the space of two people who had just heard the unvarnished, clinical truth spoken aloud. Story 2. I've been to a lot of weddings. I've seen cake collapses, dress malfunctions, and a best man speech that accidentally revealed a secret pregnancy. But I have never, not once, felt the air physically leave a room the way it did when a guest stood up, raised his glass, and told the groom he hoped he had a good lawyer on retainer for the divorce. The DJ played Uptown Funk 30 seconds later like he was trying to resuscitate a corpse. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. The marriage flatlined before the cake was even cut. This wasn't my wedding, thank God. I was a +1, a last-minute fill-in for a buddy whose girlfriend bailed. I barely knew the couple. The bride, Megan, was a force of nature, all high-decibel laughter and perfectly coordinated everything. The groom, Jake, seemed like a nice enough guy, the kind who smiles a lot and says very little. The ceremony was standard. The reception was in a massive, sterile banquet hall that smelled like lavender air freshener trying to cover up old carpet. The food was fine. The DJ was playing the hits. It was a perfectly forgettable wedding. Until the speeches. The best man, Jake's older brother Leo, got up first. He told a few rambling, inside joke stories from childhood that landed with polite, confused laughter. Standard stuff. Then the maid of honor, Megan's best friend, gave a tearful, polished speech about destiny and fairy tales. Also standard. Then the floor was opened up for anyone else who wanted to say a few words. A silence fell, the kind where people suddenly become very interested in the condensation on their water glasses. Then, a man I'd later learn was Megan's uncle, a guy with a booming voice and a red face that suggested he'd started the cocktail hour around noon, stood up. He didn't go to the mic. He just stood at his table, plinked his glass with a butter knife, and began to speak. He didn't talk about love. He didn't talk about happiness. He talked about survival. He launched into a long, incredibly specific story about how Megan, as a teenager, had once totaled his truck. He told it as a funny anecdote, but his tone was pure resentment. Then he pivoted to Jake. He looked directly at the groom and said, and I'm quoting from memory here because it's seared into my brain, asterisk, Jake, I've watched you for 3 years now. You're a quiet one. Well, let me tell you something. In this family, the quiet ones get eaten alive. So I hope you've got a good lawyer on retainer for the divorce. Huh, I'm kidding. Mostly. He winked. A full, slow-motion wink. The room was a vacuum. You could hear the HVAC system humming. Megan's smile was frozen on her face, her eyes wide and fixed on a point somewhere above her uncle's head. Jake just nodded slowly, his jaw tight, and lifted his glass in a silent toast back. The uncle sat down. There was a smattering of forced, staccato applause. Then the DJ, bless his oblivious heart, immediately queued up Uptown Funk, and the dance floor erupted in a desperate attempt to pretend the last 3 minutes hadn't happened. I remember leaning over to my friend and whispering, did that just? He just shook his head and said, yeah, the uncle's an eccentric. They say he's just honest. I watched them the rest of the night. Megan spent the entire reception in a swirling vortex of her bridesmaids, never once standing next to Jake unless a photographer directed her. Jake spent it at the bar, having what looked like a very intense, very hushed conversation with his brother, Leo. They didn't have a first dance. The DJ announced it, and the two of them just stood in the middle of the floor for a beat before Megan waved her hand dismissively and the DJ awkwardly moved on. They didn't last a year. Story 3. The flower girl was 6 years old, and she told me the bride called her a gargoyle. 30 seconds later, the groom whispered something in his new wife's ear that made her face go white, and then he walked out of his own wedding reception and never came back to the marriage. I was 17, tagging along with my mom to the wedding of her college friend's son. I didn't know a single soul there aside from my mom, and she was busy being a plus one. I was planted at a corner table near the back, nursing a glass of flat Sprite and watching the dance floor when the ceremony's flower girl, a kid who couldn't have been older than 6, sat down at my table. She was alone. Her little white dress was smudged with grass stains, and she was methodically destroying a bread roll with the intensity of a tiny, heartbroken general. I asked if she was okay. She looked at me with these huge, wet eyes and said, very matter-of-factly, the bride told me I ruined her pictures because I smiled too big. She said I looked like a gargoyle. My mom is crying in the bathroom. I was stunned. Before I could even formulate a response, the groom, in his crisp suit, looking like he'd just stepped off a magazine cover, strode over. He didn't look at me. He crouched down to the little girl's level and said, in a voice so tender it made my chest ache, hey champ, you did so good out there. Those pictures, they're going to be the best ones because you were in them. He took the mangled bread roll from her hands, replaced it with a whole new one from a passing waiter's tray, and gave her a little wink. Don't let anyone dull your sparkle, okay? Especially not in a big white dress. He then stood up, straightened his tie, and walked directly to the head table. The bride was sitting there, fuming, adjusting her veil. He leaned down, and I watched his face transform. The warmth vanished. He said one single sentence to her, too low for me to hear, but I saw his jaw clench and her face go from angry to ashen. Then he walked off the dance floor, out a side door, and I didn't see him again for the rest of the night. The wedding continued. The bride had her father walk her around for the father-daughter dance. She cut the cake with her brother. She smiled for photos. And the entire time, she kept darting glances toward that side door, a mix of fury and panic in her eyes. I found out later from my mom that the little girl was the groom's niece from his side of the family, his favorite sister's daughter. The bride had apparently been making passive-aggressive comments about the country bumpkin relatives all week, and the groom had been letting it slide until that moment. The marriage lasted exactly 4 months. The divorce was finalized a week after the 1-year anniversary. Story 4. I photographed dozens of weddings, but I'd never seen a bride wash her face clean of makeup in the middle of her reception and then spend spend the rest of the night walking around her own husband like he was a puddle she didn't want to step in. I do photography on the side. Nothing fancy, but I've shot enough weddings to know when something is wrong before most people notice. The signs are subtle. A groom who won't look at his bride during portraits. A mother who keeps checking her phone. That kind of tension you can't capture in a frame, but you feel standing behind the lens. This one was different. The signs weren't subtle at all. The couple had been together 7 years before the wedding. 7. Everyone kept mentioning it like it was a badge of honor. Finally, people kept saying, "About time." The bride laughed every time someone said it, but the laugh had an edge. The groom just nodded. The ceremony was fine. Standard. No tears, no big emotions, but nothing alarming either. They said their lines, exchanged rings, kissed like people kiss when they know they're being watched. I got the shots. The reception started normally. First dance was a sway. No dip, no twirl, just two people holding each other the way you hold a grocery bag you're trying not to crush. Then dinner happened. I was positioned near the head table, grabbing candidates, when the groom's brother stood up for a toast. He was clearly drunk. The glass in his hand sloshed. He tapped his fork against it for way too long, waiting for silence that kept getting interrupted by his own hiccups. He started talking about the groom, about how they'd grown up together, about all the wild nights, about how he never thought he'd see the day his brother finally got tied down. Normal enough. Then he looked directly at the bride and said, "You know you're marrying a man who cried for 3 hours when he had to give up his season tickets? Hope you're worth it, sweetheart." The table laughed. The bride didn't. She turned to the groom with this look that said, "Are you going to say something?" The groom shrugged. Not a playful shrug, a genuine shrug, like his brother had just made an observation about the weather. The toast continued. It got worse. Stories about ex-girlfriends. Stories about nights the groom couldn't remember. Stories that ended with, "But that's all behind us now, right?" The bride stopped eating. She just sat there with her fork in her hand, not moving, while the brother talked about her husband like he was a racehorse being retired against his will. When the toast finally ended, the groom stood up, clapped his brother on the back, and said, "That's my brother. Always keeps me humble." He didn't look at his wife, didn't acknowledge what had just happened, didn't check if she was okay. He just walked to the bar and ordered another drink. I watched the bride excuse herself. She walked to the bathroom, came back 10 minutes later with her face washed clean of makeup. No attempt to reapply, just a bare face at her own wedding reception. Her sister rushed over with a compact, but the bride waved her off. For the rest of the night, she didn't talk to the groom. Not once. She danced with her nieces. She helped the caterers cut the cake. She thanked guests personally at their tables. And every time she passed the bar where her husband stood with his brother, she walked a little wider, like she was avoiding a puddle. The groom didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. At one point, he raised his glass toward her from across the room, a kind of cheers gesture. She looked at him, didn't raise hers back, and turned to talk to someone else. I saw him make a face to his brother. A woman, am I right? Face. His brother laughed. They clinked glasses. I packed up my gear around midnight. The bride was sitting alone at the head table, shoes off, staring at the half-eaten cake. The groom was doing shots with his college buddies near the exit. They hadn't been in the same room together for the last 2 hours. I delivered the photos 2 weeks later. The bride responded to my email with 3 words, "Thank you." Perfect. The groom never responded. I'll take a quick break here to remind you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you're enjoying the story, and tell us if something like this has ever happened to you. Story 5. I was clearing plates at a wedding reception when the groom's father slipped him a thick envelope and whispered something that made his face drain of color. An hour later, I saw the groom disappear into a storage closet with a woman in jeans, while his pregnant bride was feeding him cake at the head table. I was a busboy clearing tables at a wedding reception when I watched the groom's father hand him an envelope and whisper something that made the groom go pale. I want to be clear, I was invisible at this event. Just a kid in a white button-down with a bus tub, clearing plates people had barely touched. Nobody looked at me twice. The wedding was at this old banquet hall that had been fancy maybe 40 years ago. Faded gold curtains. Carpet that smelled like 1,000 spilled drinks. The couple was young. Really young. She looked about 19. He looked maybe 21. They had that pinned-together look of people who are trying very hard to look like they belong in a situation they don't. The ceremony happened before my shift started. I came in during cocktail hour, so I missed the actual vows. But I saw the aftermath. The groom was standing near the bar with his father. His father was a thick man in a too-tight suit, red-faced, the kind of guy who laughs loud so you know he's the one in charge. He slapped the groom on the back repeatedly, like he was trying to start a lawnmower. Then he pulled out an envelope from his inside jacket pocket. Thick envelope, like something that had weight. He handed it over and leaned in close. I was walking past with my bus tub and caught the tail end of it. Cover what your mother doesn't need to know about. The groom opened the envelope right there, peeked inside. His whole body changed. His shoulders dropped. His face went from wedding day nerves to something else, something that looked like relief mixed with dread. He shoved the envelope into his own jacket so fast a corner of it stuck out. His father walked away laughing. The groom stood there for a long moment with his hand pressed against his chest where the envelope was, like he was making sure it didn't fall out. I didn't think much of it at the time. People hand envelopes at weddings, gifts, cards, whatever. The reception kicked off. The bride and groom did their first dance to a song that seemed too slow for how young they were. They moved like they were practicing a choreography they hadn't quite memorized. She kept looking at his jacket, not his face, his jacket, where the envelope was. During dinner, I noticed the bride wasn't eating. She had a full plate in front of her. She moved food around with her fork but never lifted it to her mouth. The groom was eating like a man who hadn't seen food in days. He didn't notice she wasn't touching hers. Around the time the cake was being cut, I saw the groom slip away. He didn't tell anyone, just stood up from the head table while the bride was talking to a guest and walked toward the back hallway. I was taking dirty plates to the kitchen and saw him duck into a small side room that was supposed to be for storage. The door didn't close all the way. I wasn't trying to look, but I heard voices. Him, I told you not to come. A woman's voice. I wanted to see it. Him, you saw it. Now go. Her, is that what you want? Long silence. Then him, what I want doesn't matter anymore. I kept walking, pushed through the kitchen doors, told myself I imagined it. When I came back out with clean plates for the dessert tables, I scanned the room. The groom was back at the head table. The bride was feeding him a piece of cake. Everyone was clapping, smiling, taking photos. But I noticed something. There was a woman sitting at a table in the back corner, not dressed like a guest, jeans under a nice top, no corsage. She wasn't eating. She wasn't talking to anyone. She was just watching the head table with her arms crossed. And when the groom laughed at something, she didn't look away. She just kept watching, perfectly still, like she was waiting for something. The bride didn't seem to notice her. Or maybe she did. At one point, the bride got up to use the restroom, and her path took her past that back corner table. She walked faster when she passed it, shoulders tighter, head down, like she was moving through cold water. I found out the rest from one of the catering servers who knew the family. We were breaking down tables at the end of the night, and she was gossipy in the way exhausted hospitality workers get. The envelope from the father was cash. A lot of it. Enough to pay off something the groom had been hiding, some debt, some mistake, something his mother couldn't find out about. The wedding happened because the bride's family was religious and she was pregnant. The groom had been seeing someone else the entire time they were engaged. The woman in the jeans was the other woman. She sat through the whole reception, watched the whole thing. The marriage lasted just over a year. The groom left when the baby was 6 months old, moved in with the woman from the back corner table. The bride moved back in with her parents. The cash from the father was gone within months. Nobody knows where. Story 6. I was a guest at a wedding where the couple had been together for 9 years before anyone proposed, and the entire event felt like a funeral for something that had already died. Let me explain. I was there because my roommate was dating the best man. I didn't know the bride or groom. I was basically cargo. I showed up with a gift bag from Target and an open mind. The wedding was at a museum. Glass walls, sculptures everywhere. The kind of place where you feel like you're not supposed to touch anything, including the people. The ceremony was short, efficient. The bride walked down the aisle to a string quartet playing something that wasn't canon in D, which I appreciated. She looked stunning. He looked fine. They said their lines. They kissed. Everyone clapped. Normal. The reception was in a different wing of the museum. Dinner was served family style. I was seated at a table with people I didn't know, making the usual small talk about how I knew the couple. I didn't, so I just kept saying friend of a friend and nodding. The first sign came during the champagne toast. The maid of honor stood up. She was clearly nervous. She talked about how she'd known the bride since kindergarten, how she'd watched her fall in love, get her heart broken, fall in love again, how the groom was the one who finally stuck. She laughed. The crowd laughed. Then she said, I've never seen anyone fight harder for a relationship than bride. She wanted this so badly, and she got it. She got what she wanted. She raised her glass. People clinked, but I noticed the groom didn't drink. He just held his glass, looked at the bride, and set it down without sipping. The best man was next. He was drunk, not sloppy drunk, but the kind of drunk where you can see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He talked about how the groom was his best friend, how they'd been through everything together, how the groom had finally settled down after years of living like a rock star. He said, we didn't think this day would ever come. Honestly, we had bets, but here we are. He showed up. That's what counts. The groom laughed. The bride laughed, but her laugh was a half beat behind everyone else's. Then the groom's father stood up without being introduced. He was a big man with a voice that filled the room without a microphone. He talked about his son, about how proud he was, about how marriage was about sticking it out even when you don't want to. He told a story about his own marriage, about a rough patch that lasted 3 years, about how he and his wife almost called it quits once, but didn't because you don't throw away something you built. He looked directly at the groom when he said that last part. The mother of the groom, sitting beside him, was staring at her plate. She didn't look up once during the entire speech. After dinner, the dancing started. The bride and groom did their first dance to a song I didn't recognize. They moved well together. Practiced, but I watched them the whole time. He didn't look at her face. He looked over her shoulder, at the crowd, at the ceiling, anywhere but her. She stared at his chest the entire song. Neither of them spoke. I was standing near the dessert table later when I overheard a conversation between two older women. They were sitting at a table that had been pushed against the wall, watching the dance floor. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. They just weren't trying to be quiet. One said, "She waited 9 years for that ring." 9 years. The other said, "You wait that long, you're not waiting for the marriage. You're waiting to prove you didn't waste your time." The first woman nodded. He proposed because she gave him an ultimatum. Everyone knows that. Everyone except her, apparently. They both looked at the dance floor. The bride was dancing with her father now. The groom was at the bar, talking to his best man, gesturing with his hands like he was explaining something complicated. I asked my roommate on the drive home what the deal was with that wedding. She sighed like she'd been waiting to talk about it. Apparently, the couple had been together since college. The bride wanted marriage from year 3. The groom kept putting it off. Every year there was a reason. Finances, career, timing. She finally gave him a deadline. He proposed 3 days before it expired. The ring was from a chain jewelry store. He didn't get down on one knee. He handed it to her in the car. The wedding planning took 18 months. The bride did everything. Venue, caterer, florist, photographer. The groom's only contribution was showing up to the tastings and saying, "Whatever you want." I didn't find out what happened after until last year. I ran into the best man's ex, my former roommate, at a coffee shop. We caught up. I asked about the couple from the museum wedding. She told me they lasted 2 years. The bride wanted kids. The groom said he wasn't ready. Then he said he didn't want them at all. The bride moved out, filed for divorce, started dating someone new within 6 months, got engaged again within a year. That wedding, my former roommate said, was different. The groom cried when he saw her. The speeches were about them, not about surviving each other. The bride danced the entire night with her shoes off, and her husband never left her side. The first groom moved to a different city, works remote, lives alone, no kids. Story 7. My cousin got married in a bowling alley parking lot wearing a sundress with the tags still on, and the ceremony stopped cold so the groom could ask his parole officer for permission to say "I do," which he got, by the way, before walking back and finishing the vows like nothing had happened. My cousin's wedding was held in a bowling alley parking lot, and the groom spent the ceremony on the phone with his parole officer. I need to explain how I ended up there. I was 19, visiting my grandparents for the summer, and my cousin, we'll call her Danielle, announced she was getting married in 3 days. 3 days. No invitations. No planning. Just a text that said Saturday at noon, bring a dish to pass. I asked my grandmother what the rush was. She gave me a look that said everything and nothing. The bowling alley was called Strike Zone, and it had closed years ago. The building was boarded up. The parking lot was cracked asphalt with weeds pushing through. But someone had dragged out a set of plastic picnic tables from somewhere, and there was a cooler full of warm soda, and a woman I didn't recognize was grilling hot dogs on a portable propane setup. Danielle was wearing a white sundress she'd bought at a department store that morning. The tags were still visible at the back of her neck. She was barefoot. Her hair was in a ponytail. She looked like she'd shown up to a barbecue and accidentally ended up getting married. The groom arrived 45 minutes late. He drove a truck with a missing tailgate. His name was something with a hard consonant. Chad, maybe, or Trent. He was wearing jeans and a polo shirt that still had the creases from being folded. His friend had driven him. The friend stayed in the truck with the engine running. Danielle's face when she saw him pull in was not the face of a bride seeing her groom. It was the face of someone who had been holding their breath and finally allowed themselves to exhale because the thing they were afraid wouldn't show up showed up. They didn't have an officiant. Danielle had asked my grandfather to do it. My grandfather was 82 and had never performed a ceremony in his life. He stood there in his church pants, holding a piece of notebook paper where he'd written down some lines he'd found online. The wind kept blowing the paper. He kept squinting at it. Halfway through the vows, the groom's phone rang. He looked at it, said, "I gotta take this," and walked about 20 feet away. We all stood there. Danielle stood there. My grandfather stood there holding his paper. The hot dog lady turned off the grill so she could watch. The groom talked on the phone for about 4 minutes. His voice carried. We heard words like violation and check-in and I know. He hung up, walked back, and said, "Okay, keep going." My grandfather continued. Danielle said, "I do," in a voice so quiet I almost missed it. The groom said, "I do," like he was ordering a sandwich. My grandfather pronounced them married. Nobody cheered. Nobody clapped. The friend in the truck honked once. The reception was the hot dogs and some casseroles people had brought. Danielle's aunt had made a Jell-O salad. Someone brought chips. The groom's friend got out of the truck, ate 3 hot dogs, and got back in. The groom spent most of the time on the picnic bench, scrolling through his phone, occasionally looking up to say something to one of his buddies who had shown up late. Danielle sat at a different table. She ate a cold hot dog. She talked to my grandmother. She helped the hot dog lady clean the grill. At one point, she walked over to the groom, touched his shoulder, and said something. He nodded without looking up from his phone. She stood there for a moment, then walked back to her table. I'll take a quick break here to remind you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you're enjoying the story, and tell us if something like this has ever happened to you. I asked my grandmother later, driving home, what the story was. She said Danielle had been with this guy for about a year. He had a record, something from before. Danielle thought she could fix him, or help him, or whatever it is young women think when they attach themselves to men who are going nowhere. She was pregnant for months along. She wanted the baby to have a father's last name on the birth certificate. My grandmother said all of this with her eyes on the road, her voice flat. I asked if she thought it would last. She said, "Honey, that man didn't look at her once. Not once. From the time he got out of that truck to the time he got back in it, he never once looked at her face." She was right. I thought about it. The whole afternoon, every interaction, he had looked at her hands, her stomach, over her shoulder. Never her eyes. They lasted 18 months. Danielle had the baby. The groom violated his parole about 6 weeks after the wedding and went back inside. Danielle moved in with her mother. She filed for divorce when the baby was 7 months old. The groom signed the papers from wherever he was. No contest, no argument, just a signature on a dotted line. I ran into Danielle at a grocery store a few years ago. She was pushing a cart with a toddler in the seat. Different last name on her credit card when she paid. She looked good. Tired, but good. The kind of tired that comes from working and raising a kid, not the kind that comes from carrying someone else's weight. She asked if I remembered her wedding. I said I did. She laughed, not a sad laugh, a real one. "That was something, wasn't it?" she said. "A bowling alley parking lot. My grandfather marrying us. His PO calling in the middle of it." I said I remembered the phone call. She nodded, grabbed her bags, and said, "He's still in prison." That phone call was him asking permission to get married. They made him call and ask permission, and he did it right there, in front of everyone. She said it like it was funny, like it was just another story from a life she'd walked away from. Story 8. I delivered 15 pizzas to a wedding where the bride was holding a baby on her hip, and the groom gave a toast about how they didn't plan any of this. And 2 years later, I ran into her at a gas station and found out he threw a pizza box at her, which would have been darkly funny if the baby hadn't been in the room. I was 18, working at a pizza place near the highway. Friday night, I get an order for 15 large pizzas going to an address I didn't recognize. The instructions said drive around back, tent in the field. I figured it was a graduation party or something. I pulled up to a house, not a venue, a house, split level, siding missing in a few places, lawn that hadn't been mowed in weeks. There was a white tent set up in the backyard, the kind you rent from the place that also rents porta potties. Folding chairs underneath, a table with a cooler on it. I carried the pizzas around back. A woman met me. She was wearing a white dress that looked like it came from a department store clearance rack. She had flowers in her hair that were wilting. She was holding a baby on her hip. The baby was wearing a white onesie with daddy's little girl on it. She said, "Oh, thank God, people are starving." I set the pizzas on the table. I was about to leave when she asked me to stay for a minute because she needed to pay me and her purse was inside. I waited. I stood by the tent. I looked around. There were maybe 30 people. Folding chairs. No decorations. No flowers except the ones in her hair. A guy in a suit that was too big for him was standing by a cooler, pulling out beers and handing them to people. I figured that was the groom. The bride came back with cash. She counted it out. Her hands were shaking. She said, "Thanks for coming all the way out here. We had a caterer cancel on us this morning." I said something like, "No problem," and started walking back to my car. Then I heard someone tapping a glass. I turned around. The guy in the too big suit was standing in front of the tent. He had a beer in his hand and was tapping it with a key. He said he wanted to say a few words. He said, "Most of you know me, and Sam didn't plan this. But you know what? Sometimes the best things in life are the things you don't plan." He pointed at the bride. She was standing by the pizza table, holding the baby, and she looked like someone waiting for a punchline. He continued, "We got the baby. We got the house. We got the tent. We got pizza." He laughed. Some people laughed. "We got everything we need, right?" The bride didn't laugh. She was looking at the tent, at the folding chairs, at the pizzas, at the baby on her hip. Her face was the face of someone doing math and not liking the answer. Someone asked if there was going to be a cake. The groom said, "Nah, we got pizza. Who needs cake?" The bride said, very quietly, "I wanted a cake." The groom didn't hear her, or he pretended not to. He opened another beer. I left. I drove back to the pizza place. I didn't think about that wedding again until 2 years later when I ran into the bride at a gas station. I recognized her because of the baby, who was now a toddler sitting in the cart. I told her I remembered delivering pizzas to her wedding. She looked at me for a second, then said, "Oh yeah, the pizza wedding." I asked how things were. She said, "We're divorced." She said a it the way someone says, I'm out of milk. Flat, no emotion. She told me they lasted 11 months. The groom lost his job a month after the wedding. Then he stopped looking for a new one. Then he started drinking during the day. Then he started saying she was the one who trapped him with the baby. She said she left when he threw a pizza box at her. Not at her specifically, at the wall near her. But the baby was in the room. She said she moved into her mother's basement. She got a job at a daycare. The toddler was in her cart because she'd just picked him up from his father's weekend visit. His father didn't show up. She had to drive across town to get him from the father's sister's house. She said, I wanted a cake. That was all I wanted. One thing. And he couldn't even give me that. I didn't know what to say. I was 20. I had no advice. I just said I was sorry. She said, don't be. I'm better off. I just wish I'd known sooner. When you're standing there in a dress you bought at Target and you're serving pizza at your own wedding and your husband is drinking beer and telling everyone you didn't plan any of it, you know right then. You just don't want to admit it. She paid for her gas. She put the toddler in the car. She drove away. Story 9. The bride walked down the aisle to a song playing from her sister's phone. The groom was crying like a hostage, and his own brother stood up during the toast and said, none of us know what you see in him. And the bride's mother told me in the buffet line that her daughter was marrying down because she was too smart to find anyone who could keep up. I need to give you some background. I was 22, dating a guy whose sister was getting married. I had met the bride, we'll call her Morgan, maybe 3 times before the wedding. She was smart, really smart, the kind of smart that makes other people uncomfortable because she didn't bother to hide it. She was finishing her master's degree in something complicated that involved equations. The groom, let's call him Kyle, worked at a mattress store. Nobody said anything about the mattress store, but everyone thought it. The wedding was at a hotel conference room, not a ballroom, a conference room, the kind with drop ceilings and beige walls and a projector screen that nobody had bothered to roll up. Someone had put white tablecloths over the folding tables and called it a day. The ceremony happened in the same room. The chairs were rearranged from banquet setup to ceremony setup while guests stood in the hallway. I watched the groom's father help the groom's uncle move a stack of chairs. The uncle was wearing shorts. At a wedding, Morgan walked down the aisle to a song from her phone held by her sister. No musicians, no speakers, just a phone and a sister who kept checking the screen to make sure the song wasn't about to end. The groom was crying before she got to the front, full tears. He kept wiping his face with his hand. I thought it was sweet at first. Then I realized he was crying because he was nervous, not because he was overcome with emotion, because he looked terrified, like a man who had wandered into a situation he didn't know how to exit. Morgan reached him. She was calm. Her face was the face of someone who had decided something a long time ago and was just following through. The officiant was a friend of the groom's. He was not qualified to officiate anything. He kept stumbling over the words. At one point, he said, dearly beloved, and then paused for so long that someone in the back said, you got this, loud enough for everyone to hear. The vows were the standard kind. The groom's voice shook. Morgan's voice did not shake. She said her lines like she was reading instructions for assembling furniture. Clear, precise, no feeling. Then came the kiss. The groom went for a long one. Morgan pulled back after about 2 seconds. She smiled, but it was the smile of someone who had just won an argument by not having it. The reception was in the same conference room. The food was buffet style. Pasta with red sauce, pasta with white sauce, salad in a bowl the size of a bathtub, bread rolls that were hard on the outside and cold on the inside. I was standing in line behind Morgan's mother when she leaned in and whispered the thing about Morgan marrying him because she thought she couldn't do better. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. The mother continued. She said Morgan had been engaged before to a guy who was her equal. That engagement ended because the guy got a job in another city and Morgan didn't want to leave. Then she met Kyle. Kyle was nice. Kyle was safe. Kyle would never leave because Kyle didn't have anywhere to go. The mother said all of this while spooning salad onto her plate. Her voice was quiet. Her face was calm. She was not sad. She was not angry. She was just explaining. The toasts were where things got uncomfortable. The maid of honor was Morgan's best friend from college. She stood up, adjusted the microphone, and said, I'm going to say something that Morgan is going to hate me for. She paused. Morgan, you are the smartest person I know. You are also the most stubborn, and I know you're going to make this work because you make everything work, even when you shouldn't have to. She raised her glass. People clinked. Morgan's face did not change. The best man was Kyle's brother. He was drunk. He talked about how Kyle had never been the settling down type, how they all thought he was going to be single forever, how Morgan changed the game for him. Then he said, honestly, none of us know what you see in him, Morgan, but we're glad you see something. Laughter. Nervous laughter. The groom laughed loudest. Morgan did not laugh. I watched her during the rest of the reception. She moved through the room thanking guests. She talked to her grandmother for 20 minutes. She helped a child who had spilled punch. She cut the cake with a knife that was too small and made it work anyway. The groom followed her around like a puppy. He kept touching her arm. She let him, but did not touch him back. At one point, I saw Morgan's mother and father standing by the window. They were looking at their their daughter across the room. Her father was shaking his head. Her mother put her hand on his arm. Neither of them said anything. I found out what happened after because my boyfriend's sister stayed friends with Morgan on social media. The marriage lasted 3 years. Morgan got a job offer in a different state. Carl said he would move with her. Then he didn't. He said he needed to think about it. Then he said he needed to talk to his mother. Then he said he couldn't leave his friends. Morgan moved anyway. She filed for divorce 6 months later. Carl told people she blindsided him. Morgan told no one anything. Story 10. I was 63 at the time, working part-time after retirement because I couldn't stand sitting at home. I've cleaned up after hundreds of weddings, birthday parties, retirement parties, funeral receptions. I've seen it all, but this one still sits in my chest when I think about it. The hall was rented by a young couple, early 20s. The bride's mother handled all the paperwork. She was a nurse, wore scrubs under her coat when she came to book the place, paid in cash, asked about cleaning fees 3 times. The day arrived. I showed up at 2 p.m. to open up. The bride was already there. She was setting out centerpieces on the tables, little mason jars with baby's breath. She had a notebook with her, pages torn out, diagrams of where everything was supposed to go. Her dress was hanging on a hook in the office. It was simple, white, not fancy, but she kept looking at it like it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. The groom arrived at 3:30. He came in with 3 other guys. They were carrying a cooler, not a small one, the kind you take camping. The groom set it behind the bar and popped it open. Beer, lots of beer. The hall had a no outside alcohol policy. I pointed at the sign on the wall. He said, "It's my wedding, old man. Relax." I called the bride's mother. She came out of the bathroom where she was helping her daughter. She looked at the cooler. She looked at me. She said, "I'll handle it." She walked over to the groom, said something I couldn't hear, and the cooler went back to the car. The groom's face was the color of someone who had been embarrassed in front of his friends. I'll take a quick break here to remind you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you're enjoying the story, and tell us if something like this has ever happened to you. At some point, the groom stood up on a chair. He was trying to get everyone's attention. He said he wanted to make a toast. He said, "To my wife. She's been waiting for this day her whole life." Well, babe, you got it. Hope it's everything you dreamed of. He laughed. His friends laughed. He jumped off the chair and stumbled. Someone caught him. I saw the bride's face. She was looking at her hands. Her mother was rubbing her back. Later, the groom was near the bathroom. He was leaning against the wall. His friends were around him. One of them was saying, "You good, man? You good?" The groom said, "I'm great. I'm married. I did it." He said, "I did it," like he had completed a task, like he had checked something off a list. Then he threw up, right there, against the wall, on his shoes, on the floor. His friends laughed. They took pictures. They pulled him outside. I got my mop. I cleaned it up. That's my job. The bride came out of the bathroom. She had changed out of her dress. She was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt. Her mother was with her. They walked past me toward the front door. The bride looked at the spot where her husband had thrown up. She looked at me holding the mop. She didn't say anything. She just kept walking. I finished cleaning. I turned off the lights. I locked up. I found out what happened after because the bride's mother called the hall a few weeks later to ask about getting her deposit back. She told the manager that the marriage didn't work out. She said her daughter filed for divorce after 4 months. She said the groom moved in with one of the friends from the wedding, the one who brought the whiskey. Story 11. I sat across from a couple in our premarital counseling session where she described wanting 3 kids while he said he was not really a kid person. And 18 months later, her mother sent me a photo of the baby with a note that said the father had left 3 months before she was born because he didn't sign up for this. My husband and I volunteered as mentors for engaged couples. The church offered a program, 8 weeks of sessions covering money, kids, conflict, communication, the whole roadmap. We signed up because our own experience with the program had saved our marriage before it started. We walked in thinking love was enough. We walked out knowing love was the entry fee, not the destination. Our job was simple. We handed couples a workbook. We asked questions. We sat back and watched how they answered. I could tell you about the couple who discovered in session 3 that one wanted 5 kids and the other wanted none. They had been together for 4 years and had never discussed it. She cried. He stared at the ceiling. They got married anyway. I saw her at the grocery store 2 years later with a baby in the cart and a look on her face that said she had lost an argument she didn't know she was having. I could tell you about the couple who could not agree on money. He had $30,000 in credit card debt he had not disclosed. She found out in our session because he mentioned it casually, like it was a funny story. She asked how he planned to pay it off. He said he figured they would figure it out together. She sat there with her hands folded on the table, and I watched something click shut behind her eyes. But the one that still keeps me up sometimes was a couple in their mid-20s. Let's call them Brandon and Alyssa. They came in holding hands. They sat close. They laughed at each other's jokes. On paper, they looked great. We started with the easy questions. Where will you live? They agreed. City apartment, at least for the first few years. How will you handle holidays? They agreed. Split Split time between families. Small stuff. Green lights across the board. Then we hit the kids question. My husband asked, how many children do you both want? Alyssa said, 3. I've always wanted 3. Brandon said nothing. My husband asked again. Brandon said, I don't really think about that stuff. Whatever happens, happens. I asked, have you talked about what happens if you can't have children? Or if there are medical complications? Or if one of you changes your mind after the first? Alyssa looked at Brandon. Brandon looked at his hands. He said, she knows I'm not really a kid person, but she wants them, so we'll have them. I asked, what does not really a kid person mean to you? He shrugged. I don't like loud noises. I like my space. I like my stuff. Kids break stuff. Alyssa laughed. She said, he's joking. He's great with kids. His nieces love him. I looked at Brandon. He was not laughing. We moved to finances. Separate accounts or joint? They agreed on joint. Bills split evenly. Who handles the budget? Alyssa said she would. Brandon said he was fine with that. Then we asked about debt. Alyssa had student loans. About $30,000. She had a payment plan. She was on top of it. Brandon had nothing. No debt. But he also had no savings. He worked construction. Good money when there was work. When there wasn't, he didn't work. He said, I'm not really a planner. I live in the moment. Alyssa said, he's been working steady for 6 months now. It's fine. I asked Brandon what his plan was for slow seasons. He said, I figure it out. I asked Alyssa what would happen if a slow season hit when they had 3 kids and a mortgage. She looked at Brandon. Brandon looked at his hands again. She said, we'll figure it out together. He said, yeah, together. We moved to conflict. I asked them to describe a recent fight. Alyssa talked about a disagreement over a weekend trip. She wanted to visit her sister. He wanted to go camping with his friends. They argued for 3 days. She ended up going alone. He went camping. I asked how they resolved it. Alyssa said, we agreed to do separate things. I asked if they were happy with that resolution. She said, I wanted him to come with me. He said, I wanted her to let me have my own time. I asked if they had found a compromise. Neither answered. The session ended. They left holding hands. She was talking about wedding venues. He was nodding. My husband and I sat in the empty room after they left. We didn't say anything for a while. Then my husband said, that one's not going to make it. I asked why. He said, because she's marrying a man she doesn't know, and he's marrying a life he doesn't want. I tried to push back. They seemed happy. They seemed in love. My husband said, she thinks he'll change when they have kids. He thinks she'll stop wanting kids when she sees he won't help. Neither of them is right. They're just hoping the other one gives up first. He was right. We got updates sometimes. The program had a check-in system. 6 months after the wedding, we got a note from Melissa. She thanked us for the sessions. She said the wedding was beautiful. She attached a photo, both of them smiling. She looked happy. He looked like a man who had been told to smile for a photo. 18 months later, we got another note. This one was from her mother. Alyssa had given birth to a daughter. Brandon had left 3 months before the baby was born. He said he wasn't ready. He said he needed space. He said he didn't sign up for this. Alyssa was living with her parents. She was working part-time from home. The student loans were still there. The baby was healthy. Brandon was somewhere. They weren't sure where. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Got a story to share? Drop it in the comments and let us know which one was your favorite.